everyone. Welcome to today's webinar about making forms more dynamic with REST API endpoints. My name is Summer, and I'm here with Pablo Barroso and Giovanni Lopez, who will be demoing how to use REST API endpoints from Process Maker's Dynaforms to add additional functionality to your digital forms. But before we get around to the demos, first of all, I'm going to do a brief introduction about Process Maker for any newbies out there. Then I'll do a brief introduction about using a REST API endpoints in forms and about the functions you can perform doing that. And then we'll get to the meat of the webinar, which will be the demos performed by Pablo and Giovanni. And if you have any questions, feel free to submit them at any time, and we'll get around to them when we finish the two demos. So let me go and get into a little bit about Process Maker. So first of all, Process Maker features a drag and drop process design interface, which allows you to design any matter of process in just a few minutes. We feature elements in our shapes toolbar that are standardized and are equipped to design any type of process from any vertical or department within your company. We also feature a drag and drop Dynaform designer, and you'll see a little bit about this today. We have a whole manner of different types of controls, including text boxes, text areas, panels, grids, links, anything you can think of, we have it. And the best thing about it is you only have to design one form for it to be displayed on any kind of device, such as tablets, phones, or a desktop screen. And then after you run your processes, you can report on that data collected from going through your workflows using our data reporting tools. And then this way you can find any bottlenecks and inefficiencies in the processes that you run with Process Maker. And then the eventual goal of this is to optimize your processes to boost your company's efficiency and collect further cost savings using any key performance indicators or information collected from your processes with the reporting tools. So next, let me get on to a little bit about using REST API endpoints in Dynaforms. So first of all, there are a lot of actions you can perform with REST API endpoints in Dynaforms. This is just a brief list of some of those actions. So first of all, you can perform validations, and we'll be showing you an example of this shortly. So for example, you can check whether or not a user already exists in an external application from the Dynaform, and then you can stop the submission if that username already exists. You can also use REST API endpoints to autofill information. So for example, you can use Process Maker's internal REST API endpoints to autofill fields within the Dynaform about the user logged in, so they don't have to manually fill in those fields. You can also use it to make calculations. So for example, if you don't want to manually change exchange rates every time they change, you can use an external REST API endpoint to get that exchange rate information and then convert it into another currency. You can also send information entered into the Dynaform to external applications. So for example, if a user fills out a Dynaform, you can send that information to create an account for that user. And I've hinted at this a little bit, but to be clear, you can use both external REST API endpoints from external applications and Process Maker's own internal API library. And we'll be showing you where to find that API library in this webinar as well. So when you come out of this webinar, you'll be fully equipped to be using any type of REST API endpoint in your Dynaform. So that concludes my brief introduction. So let's allow Pablo to get on with his demo.
Welcome to this demo. Well, in today's demo, my purpose is to explain you how you can use AJAX requests to improve your dynamic in your forms. So in this case, I'm going to show you two examples. And these two examples are going to be using three types of endpoints. Okay, so I'm going to use an endpoint here for users. Okay, where I'm going to obtain the information of this user and then display in a Dynaform. This is a service that you can find in the wiki page. Well, the literature, you can find it in the wiki page, and it's available for Process Maker. Then I'm going to use an endpoint, this one, okay, from the World Bank, to display some financial data in a Dynaform. And finally, the last example is going to be about currency conversion. Okay, I'm going to use one of these endpoints to show you. Okay, I'm going to show you how it works, the conversions between US dollars and euro. Okay, so here you can find it. So I'm going to start with the first example. Okay. In this example, we have a user who wants to know information from a user and then financial data. So we have these two things. So Process Maker provides this opportunity to gather this information and display it in a Dynaform. So in this case, what I'm going to show you is the Dynaform that I use to make the request. So here we have the Dynaform that is going to execute, that's going to help you to execute the request. First request to get the personal information, and then the other request to obtain the financial data. So if I go to the preview, then in here, I'm going to execute some requests, okay? But first of all, I need to open the console to see our request. So I'm going to select the user and execute this request. And here you have the code that confirms that this request has been successfully done, okay? So it is this one. And then I'm going to move to the next one. This about financial expenses. There you have another request done, okay? To see further details, you can click on one of them, like this one, and it is going to display all the information that we want to get access. So it can be the user ID, the username, and so on. So it's a list that the request is going to obtain and display it here in this table. Now, this is well, let me show you how the requests are working here. But now, what is happening behind? So I'm going to close, get out from the preview, and actually click on here, and we're going to check the code behind. For the first request, it's about getting the personal information. I want first to obtain this data: the host, the workspace, and the token. Okay? So, in that case, this is going to help me to construct this function. And well, I want to emphasize directly to the point, to the core of this request. It is this one. It's an AJAX request. Okay? In this AJAX request, first I need to construct the URL, the endpoint, from where I'm going to obtain the information. And in here, I need to place the host, and I need to obtain the user. Both of these things are going to construct the endpoint to obtain the personal information of a user. Since I obtained that information, I'm going to use the GET request. I need to read that information, okay? And finally, I'm going to provide this structure, okay, that allows me to send a request with the bearer schema, authorization, bearer plus token. If there is a success, I'm going to obtain this. I'm going to display the information with console.log user. And finally here, you're going to find how I display the information. And I am going to display in this web control. Actually, this web control is a panel. I'm going to show you right now what is that. And then a plugin data table available for JavaScript. And here the construction of the table. In here, this is important because if we are going to make any request, we want to display information. And this is how I'm going to obtain the jQuery ID. Okay, well, I'm going to obtain the ID through jQuery, and this ID represents this panel. Okay, this is the panel. For the financial information, I move back again to the code. I'm going to make this type of function. And again, I need to construct all these AJAX requests. In this AJAX request, I need to have my endpoint, this one. Then the type of request is GET. I'm going to read information. And depending on the data that I need, in this case, I need the 3, it's hard-coded. I'm going to display 3 data. And here, the token. So this is the construction of the AJAX request. And with the success, I'm going to be able to display this information here. Same case as before, I'm going to display that information with data table, the plugin available for JavaScript, and then I'm going to construct all that information. I'm going to organize this information and display it an example. This example, okay, is that ID obtained through jQuery, okay, is going to be this one. Example, here, the ID, okay? Well, that's how it works. We have used two requests through AJAX. Asynchronic requests, because I don't need to move outside the Dynaform. I can do it directly from the Dynaform. I'm going to show you one example more. I move backwards again here, and it is this one. Okay. In this process, what I try to do is that I'm going to calculate an amount. This amount is in US dollars, and I need to convert it into euro. Okay, but I want to make it directly in the Dynaform. I don't want to go outside the Dynaform and make the conversion. So for that purpose, I have used this Dynaform, total amount. Okay, and this one is going to show me this in action. So I'm going to first make the preview, show the console. Okay, so here I'm going to introduce an amount. It can be this one, and then convert the data. And here you can have the request. If I click it here, it's going to provide me the details, that information of that conversion. Okay? I'm going to close it. I'm going to close this. Okay, and I'm going to show you what is happening in our JavaScript. Okay, again, as the previous example, first example, I'm going to create this function. This function is going to be composed of an AJAX request. And notice that it is going to follow the same idea that you have seen before. Enter this endpoint that you can see here, where I provided euro as the currency in which I need the conversion. Then the type is going to be get, because I need to read this data. I need to read the conversion of $1 equal how much of euro, okay? Then data, I don't need to provide data. And in success, I'm going to use all this function, because once that I obtain this success in the request, I'm going to obtain all this data, okay? In this case, I'm using a variable x. I'm pushing the data that I obtained from the request in US dollars. This data I'm going to use in this variable to obtain the value. And finally, I'm going directly here. I'm going to set the price for that request. Now, to close all these parts, all these three examples, you have noticed that I have clicked a button in the three examples, in the three requests that you have seen. And just as a way to mention, this convert data is a button that you can find here. When I click this button, I'm going to trigger this action, convert price, the function, okay? So this button allows you to work better with JavaScript functions, okay? Well, these are the three examples that you can see, and you can even do more things. So I'm going to pass to Giovanni the screen, and he's going to show you the final example.
Okay, thank you, Pablo. So this is the last example that we're going to show today. This one is related to student enrollment. What we're going to do here now is to try to create a user in an external system, but this user is going to be created right from Process Maker. Now, as an example for an external system, we're going to use Moodle. In case you're not really familiar with Moodle, this is just a learning content management system. But you can need to talk about any other external system. Now, the thing with Moodle is that it won't allow you to create a new user in case you're trying to define an existing username or an existing email address. So what we're going to do from Process Maker is to ask Moodle if the username or the email address that we're trying to use in Process Maker already exists in that system. So that's what we're going to do. Now, you can see the Dynaform that I'm going to use here. This is a simplified version of the Dynaform that we usually use in order to create users in Process Maker University, which is our e-learning platform, in case you know it. So you can see that, for example, I can try to create two different accounts. The first one is going to be an account for my friend here, Pablo Barroso. And I already know that he counts with an account with for Process Maker University. So this one should throw up an error message, right? So let me use his information here. And we're gonna also use his email address. Let me copy and paste this thing. Pablo.barroso@processmaker.com. There we go. And we're gonna create another account. This time I'm gonna create an account for a user that I know that doesn't exist yet in my external system. So we can create, for example, an account for Fred Michael. There we go. Let me just define a username for him as well. And also an email address. There we go. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is to connect to my external system. I'm asking it if this username right here and the email addresses that I'm using already exist there. So let me open my development tools. And we're going to be able to see the requests that we're going to execute right here. So you can see that I have already received this message that reads the marked usernames and email addresses already exist. So we have to correct them before being able to create these accounts. So you can see that these two elements have been marked as existing, right? And you're going to be able to also review the requests that we're sending to this external system. So we're basically asking Moodle, in this case, if there is a user account associated with this username. You can see that I'm checking the username. In this case, Pablo.Barroso. And we're going to do the same with the email address. Email Pablo.Barroso@processmaker.com. And since this user already exists in my external system, I'm going to be able to receive all of the information related to this account. But in the case of Fred Michaels, you can see that we're not receiving anything because there isn't a user account related to this username or to this email address.
Giovanni, so in this case, you used a button to validate this grid, but do you have to use, can you use other types of actions to trigger AJAX calls to an external system?
Yes, you can. What we're doing here, since we're using JavaScript, you can use any JavaScript event. You can use onClick, onChange, onBlur, or any event that you are familiar with. Okay, and in this case, we're using a grid, right? But you will be able to also use a drop-down here, so you can trigger that request whenever you select a user or whenever you select a date here. So that's just all of the options that you already have using JavaScript.
Now, in this case, you're using a GET request to get information and then validate it with Moodle. But could you send information to Moodle to create a new account and post information there?
Yes, you can. As we're going to see in the code that we're using for this Dynaform, this time we're executing just get requests. But you could also execute post requests, put requests in case you would like to create a new record or even update a record in the external system that you're using. Okay, since we have mentioned that we are using JavaScript here, we can take a look at the code that we're using, which is really familiar to what Pablo has already shown. We're basically executing a jQuery AJAX request, and you can see that maybe the only thing that is different from the examples that you have already seen is the endpoint that we're using. We're just using a service provided by Moodle. You can see that I'm connecting to the Process Maker University server, and I'm just consuming one of the services that Moodle offers right here. Maybe I can show you the specific service that we're consuming right here. We're just obtaining information from a specific user using a field in order to find it. Okay, so if Process Maker wouldn't be able to connect to an external system, what we will have to do here is to actually log in into Moodle and check if there is an account related to a specific username and email address, and you will have to do that for each account you're trying to create. But since we're actually able to connect to this external system, we can just ask Process Maker to connect to Moodle and do all of that time-consuming task for us.
So Giovanni, if I wanted to make similar validations, do I have to do it through JavaScript in a Dynaform? Like, let's say I don't know JavaScript very well. Is there another way I can do something like this?
Yes. What we have done today is to use JavaScript in order to execute AJAX requests to a server. But what you can do also in Process Maker is to use PHP in order to construct your own request using a trigger or a service task in Process Maker, or even build your own connectors using a Process Maker connector.
All right. Thanks a lot, Giovanni.
Okay.
Thanks, Giovanni and Pablo, for those excellent demos. So the audience at this time, you can submit your questions using the question functionality in your GoToWebinar panel. And we'll get to those questions in just a minute. But while you guys are submitting those questions, feel free to check out our upcoming webinars. Our next one is about Process Maker and LUMAPS and our integration with their social intranet. And that's going to be on Thursday, April 25th at 3 p.m. New York time. And after that, we have 5 HR processes that any company can automate, which is on Tuesday, April 30th at 11 a.m. New York time. And if you want to register for those webinars, feel free to visit our website at www.processmaker.com/services/webinars. And in the case you missed a webinar, you can also go to that same page and look at our recorded webinars page to watch webinars at your convenience. So again, please submit your questions at this time and we'll get to you in just a second.